Women's rights in third world countries. So, a little introduction to this presentation is basically growing up in a first world country, I have never experienced the real hardships that women go through daily in countries where they don't have rights. Inequality does exist between genders in the United States, which I think we should acknowledge, but not in the way that it does in the Middle East. This presentation is to examine different countries and how women are treated, plus any background of any feminist movements that they might have experienced. The first country that I wanted to look at is Afghanistan. Arguably, Afghanistan is one of the worst places to be a woman because of the recent ruling of the Taliban. The Taliban took over Afghanistan in the summer of 2021 during the month of August. Because of this control, women were not able to obtain any secondary or higher education. They also enforced a dress code for women in and out of the home, and the headscarves and huge dresses that we now see today. Before the takeover, women were almost always the main source of income, which I thought was pretty interesting because I always thought that Afghanistan was always negative towards women. But there are now many job restrictions where women cannot work. Since this switch, there has now been a serious incline in mental health issues and suicide. There is a huge sense of hopelessness in the country because, as mentioned, women were the main income earners of the house, and now that most of them cannot work, the country is now seeing a huge financial and economic crisis. There are, however, a few women that are still able to work, especially women that have been in their positions for a long time, but they actually have not been able to receive payment in months because funds were supplied by international aid, which the Taliban has now cut off. The next country that I wanted to look at is Syria. Similar to Afghanistan, extremist groups have taken over the rule and have now changed the way of living. ISIS is the group that is now involved with Syria, and women's rights have since drastically declined. They require women to cover full body and to also wear headscarves, which is very similar to the women in Afghanistan. If any young girl refuses to abide with the dress code, they are removed from public and from attending school forever. There have also been reported cases of abduction of girls, especially to those who travel without a male presence. And because of this, women are now being kidnapped and murdered because of the control that the men have placed. As mentioned, women cannot even be outside without a male presence, which is why the abductions have gotten so high. ISIS told men that they could not wear tight-fitting jeans, but besides that, men were not incredibly affected by the rule at all. Some cities in Syria even told men that they are able to reprimand and punish any woman that they saw that was not listening to the dress code, therefore giving more power to the men that live there. Like Afghanistan, education and access to everyday things like healthcare were also cut off to most women in the country, and they are now expected to complete all household duties. Because of the control, it was very recent, things are still happening for women in Syria. The last country that I wanted to look at is Sudan. Life for women in Sudan is full of inequality and even despair. Some women still can face genital mutilation, which I will cover in a later slide. Women do not get the same education as boys and are only taught simple things like how to read and write, and they are then taken out of school. Complete lack of proper health care is also seen all over this country, and because of this, maternal death rate, which is the rate of moms giving birth, they are now dying and it's extremely high. Rapes and forced marriage are still legal, and women can be sentenced to death for using just simple defense against their attacker. I wanted to cover more about genital mutilation because I had no idea that it still happened in today's world. It really started thousands of years ago in old religious practices, and it never really happened much in the South because of the colonizers and the British control, but the North heavily practiced it. There are many ways to perform this on women, such as removing the clitoris, but sewing shut the vaginal hole until the husband says so until he's ready for intercourse is a very common tradition. Older women also push this practice because of the tradition, and it's not seen as a bad thing to them because they also went through it. It actually became illegal in some parts of the country, and anyone who practices this mutilation can get only up to 3 years in prison, which I think is a little low. However, because things were so bad in this country, the rise of a women's rights movement began. in about 1991. Women began to get so tired of all the sexism and the oppression that is constantly holding them back. A government bill that really made them upset was the Personal Status Law of 1991. This law states that marriages are still allowed and women can only get married if they have the permission of their father or their brother, which basically means they cannot do it without a man's control. Tradition is huge in this country, like mentioned, but many of the religious traditions are harmful to women, such as the genital mutilation, so protests started to begin taking place. Women were actually able to overthrow the al Bashir leader, and a movement called Say No to Oppression started at the same time, and women are now still fighting daily for their rights back. Why is it important to research into this into other countries? Many people here have the mindset that if it's not our country, we shouldn't focus on it. And personally, I do not agree because there are many things that we can do to be educated and to help out people who are struggling in other countries. There are many programs in America and other first world countries that help raise money and materials for these women in order to get the proper help and maybe even leave their situation one day. It is important to know what is going on in foreign lands so that we can aid and make sure that we do not continue the same behaviors or patterns over here in ours. And that's it.